So will you join me in giving a warm journey welcome to Dr. Richard Blackaby? Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. What a privilege to be able to drop in on this wonderful group, and I commend you as a church for supporting your people in the marketplace. I have the privilege of traveling around the world, and I've dropped in uh, just this year to towns in South Africa, Argentina, across the U.S., where business people are saying it's tough being a godly, God-honoring business person in this culture, this society, sometimes the high stress world in which business is often done. And so I'm just seeing people banding together, and oftentimes the church doesn't provide that for them. They've got to get to a sort of some other ministry that helps them. And so I'm really impressed that your own church is doing that and helping you. And as Carrick said, I wrote a book this year that came out called The Ways of God, and I spent a couple of years really meditating upon what are the ways of God. You know, just because you may have been a Christian for a long time, it doesn't mean that you know the ways of God, because without even knowing it, we've been marinating in the world's ways all of our life. Every time you watch television, you're immersing yourself in the ways of the world. Every billboard you look at, advertisement you see, just talking to your neighbors, you're hearing what the world values, the way the world does things. And I've learned that I can't just assume that because I'm a Christian, what I'm doing is the way God would do it. Kind of a funny story. I live right across the street. I've sort of been blessed. I've got my two oldest grandchildren. I've got 8-year-old twins, cute little boys named Logan and Emerson. They live right across the street from me. So I can just look out my front window and see if my grandsons, 8 years old, are out playing basketball or something. And Logan is kind of the brainiac of the twins. He loves to learn, and he loves to share what he's learned. And Emerson's more the stud athlete. He just likes to do stuff. And but Logan is a brilliant little kid, and he's always wanting to make sure that he shares with his brother whatever it is he's learning. And so one day Logan and Emerson are in the car with their dad, and all of a sudden Emerson shouts out. He says, "Ow!" And their dad, my son Daniel, he says, "Emerson, what's wrong?" And Emerson said, "Well, Logan just punched me." And that's not really very common. And so Daniel said, "Logan, why did you hit your brother?" And he said, "Well, Dad, Emerson said he didn't know what sin was. So I showed him." And now he could be commended for trying to teach his brother some of the fundamental doctrines of the Christian faith. But I think we'd all probably agree there were better ways to teach that lesson than the way he chose. And what I've discovered is sometimes you can do the right thing, but you can do it the wrong way. And with God, I found that there's three things that are crucial. If you line these three things up, you're in a great place for success. The first thing is you have to do the right thing. There are certain things that God wants you to do that are God's will, and you need to do them. But secondly, there's a right way to do something. You can do the right thing, but do it the wrong way. And then third is the right time. You can also do the right thing, but do it too late or too early. And the people I've seen that are the most successful as Christians and as business people are those who do the right thing the right way at the right time. And for that, you're really going to need God's guidance. But I want us to focus in particularly on the ways of God today. And of course, Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and your ways are not my ways. This is the Lord's declaration. For as heaven is higher than earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Now, we don't tend to believe that. We tend to think we've got some pretty great thoughts of our own. And we can get pretty impressed with our plans and assume that if it impresses us, it probably impresses God. My dad used to always say that if he had a plan that made perfect sense to him, then it probably didn't come from God, because God's ways are not our ways. I was reading, did a little search the other day, And they, of course, people are trying to always estimate how big the universe is. They feel like it's expanding, it's continuing to grow, but to the best of their knowledge, when they look at their most powerful telescopes, they feel like they can look out, they can peer to the edge of at least what they can see. And they estimate that that's something like 46 and a half billion light years away. 46 and a half billion light years. So if you just keep going at light speed for 46 and a half billion years, you can get to the edge of at least what they know the universe is. But of course they have caveats to say it might be a lot bigger than that, but that's as far, at least we know it's that big. And I thought to myself, what God's saying in Isaiah is, that's how far your thinking is from mine. Don't ever overestimate your thoughts. And that's why we are so dependent upon his guidance, because in a world like that we face today, what makes sense to us, I've just learned not to trust my first instinct, because my first instinct often is to do what the world would do. And I've got to say, but God, what would your ways be? And so, you see this in churches. I've known churches that felt like God wanted them to build a building, and that was clearly the thing God wanted them to do. But then the way they chose to raise money, maybe to pressure people to give to the project, it so offended so many people that they lost a third of their members in the process of doing the right thing. They were building a building, that's what God wanted. It's just that they did it in a way that divided the body instead of unifying it and building it up. I see that with leading in your home. Have you ever known parents that wanted to raise godly children, so they brought their kids to church every week? But much of how they conducted themselves in their home, much of the way they reflected Christ to their kids, turned their kids away from the church. And once those kids are grown, 3, 4 kids all may walk away from the faith. Well, the parents, I remember one father, he said to my dad, he said, I raised 4 kids, took them to church every Sunday. Now, not one of those 4 kids goes to church. 2 of them claim to be atheists now. He said, but Henry, I did everything I knew to do. And my dad said, well, that may be the problem. You don't know everything that you need to do. That's why you have to call out to God and say, God, what is the way I need to be raising these kids? They did the right thing, but they may have done it the wrong way. And then, of course, just in business, I know I spend at least half my time working with leaders in the business world. And they realize they may have gone to a great business school. They may have lots of business success, but that doesn't mean that they know how to do business God's way. And so I've actually worked with a couple of ministries, but one in particular that I do a lot of work with is I work with CEOs of very, very large companies. In fact, this particular group, your company has to do at least $100 million worth of sales just to hit the bottom threshold to get in the group. These guys are very successful. We have some regular training we do at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It's the first discipleship I've ever done where people fly in on corporate jets to attend. But these guys are very, very. One guy actually flew in. You join a cohort in this particular program, and you come 10 times. You meet 10 times at DFW. And one guy flew in from Hong Kong, 10 trips to Hong Kong for a 24-hour period of training. And so these guys are very, very successful in business. But it's beginning to dawn on them that even though they've reached the top of the corporate ladder, they may be on their 3rd marriage, or their kids don't even want to talk to them. I knew one guy, very successful in business, private jets, flying around here and there. And I used to be a little envious because at Christmas he might spend it in Florence, Italy, or on a cruise in the Mediterranean or something. Until I got to know him, and I began to realize the reason that every holiday he went on an exotic trip somewhere was because he wasn't welcome at any of his kids' homes at Christmas so that he could be around his grandkids. So instead of sitting at home alone, he'd find some exotic place to jet off to so it didn't look so bad. The fact that his own kids didn't want him around at Christmas. And so these guys are saying, you know what, I feel like I've been good at business, but I just have this awful feeling I've not done things God's way. And as a result, I haven't gotten God's results. And so I want to just look at a couple of look at one or two. In the book, The Ways of God, I just identify a number of the ways that God does things. And the ways of God reflect his character. Because of who he is, he does things a certain way. And so I'll just look at one or two of those with you just to kind of give you an idea, but certainly encourage you just to make of that. If there's one thing you need to be an expert in, it is the way God does things. Because when you do things God's way, then you've got God's blessing, you've got God's power, you've got God's pleasure upon your activity. When you do things your way, it's up to you. It's up to your power. It's up to your wisdom. And I'm just at an age in my life, I don't want to waste my life just doing things Richard's way, because Richard just doesn't have enough power or wisdom to handle the kind of things coming at me in these days. So obviously one of the first ways of God is just that his ways are holy. And of course, it's because he is holy. And to be holy, of course, it means to be separate, to be distinct. It means he is not like the world. He is separate from the world. And I don't know, sometimes I know, and we mean well, but at Christmas and other times throughout the year, churches sometimes try to make God seem just like us, that he's approachable. We can identify with him. But I tell you, I don't want a God who's just like me. I want a God who's a lot more than me, a lot greater than me. And being holy means he's not like us. He's pure. He's whole. He's perfect. He's blameless. He's above reproach. You can't find any wrong with him. He's entirely consistent. He's not holy most of the time. If he was not holy all the time, he wouldn't be holy. And so what that means is that when he relates to you, he always does it out of holiness. And that means if you're going to be living your life and reflecting well on him, you've got to be living your life as holy as well. I was challenged recently by the Lord's Prayer, Matthew 6, I think it's verse 9. What's the very first thing that Jesus tells us to pray every day? Hallowed or holy be your name. Have you ever thought about that? Jesus was saying, not necessarily you say these exact words every day, but he was saying every day as you're praying, there's certain things you need to focus on. And the very first one was, hallowed or holy be your name. And of course, your name in the Bible represented your character. But of course, your prayers are never going to make God any more holy than he already is, are they? It's like, well, what am I asking God to do? God, would you please be more holy? Would your character be more holy? Clearly, you can't pray that because he's as holy as he could possibly be already. But I think what that means is, God, would you express your holiness in my life? Express your holiness through me and what I do. May my life reveal to a watching world how holy you are. Remember Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6? He went to church. He went to worship God in the temple, and God expressed his holiness to Isaiah. And what did Isaiah say in response? Woe is me, because he immediately had his mouth exposed before a holy God. God was going to reveal his holiness to Isaiah, and immediately it highlighted every sinful behavior, attitude, word that characterized Isaiah's life. And it undid Isaiah. All he could do is say, woe is me. And God was saying, I can't be made any more holy, but you can. And so you want to do things my way, I'm not going to do any work through you, Isaiah, till we first make you holy. You're going to have to reflect me in a holy way. And so every day, when you start out your day saying, God, hallowed be your name, are you prepared to say to God, would you expose the unholiness in my life the very same way you did it to Isaiah? Uh, so that throughout the day, as I go to work, every encounter I have with a customer, with a colleague, with a client, you could look at how I behaved and say, that person must serve and follow a holy God. Because look at the way they do things. They're always consistent. They're always acting with integrity. They always tell the truth. It doesn't matter at the beginning of the day, the end of the day. They're consistently always the same. And you know, the Lord's had to convict me of that. I remember years ago I was the president of a seminary, and some people that had made some commitments to our school and our institution to help us with funding and so on. They reneged on it. They just announced one day, we're not going to be giving this support that we had committed ourselves to give. We're changing up how we do things. And that was devastating for our school at the time. I was very concerned about it. I was responsible for the financial well-being of my institution. And so I didn't really have access to the guy at the top who'd made the decision, but one of his guys down the chain, I did have his email. And so I wrote him a very angry email and just lambasted him and his organization for breaking their word, for harming our school. And I was angry. And isn't it interesting? We feel sometimes justified that what we would never do when on a normal day, we can justify when we're angry. And so I basically thought, well, I'm mad. They've done something wrong, so I'm going to put my holiness aside here, and I'm going to just give him my carnal, honest opinion. And I wrote it out, and I'm moving the cursor over to click on send, and I have this check in my spirit, and I've learned to trust that check in my spirit. But at the time, I know full well God is saying, are you sure you want to send this? Are you sure you want to vent and explode on somebody? He didn't make that decision. The guy that I was emailing was actually against the decision. He saw things the way I did. But it wasn't his choice. He had to just kind of carry through with what his boss said. But I thought, yeah, I want someone to know how frustrated I am right now. So I hit send. As soon as I hit send, I knew I'd made a mistake. Because I had not reflected well on God by that email. And if I could have climbed in my laptop and pulled that email out, pulled it back, I would have done it. But immediately I just knew I'd done something wrong. And unfortunately, I was going to see that guy in about 2 weeks. And as soon as we were at a break time in this meeting we were in, I went over and pulled him aside and I apologized. And I said, that was not Christ-like. That was not, you didn't deserve that. I'm sorry. That's not how I should treat any brother in Christ or anyone. And he was very gracious. He was quick to forgive. He understood my frustration. But I thought to myself, every time I encounter someone, every time I send them an email, I'm giving them an impression of my God. And my God is holy. And I want to reflect well on my God. I remember one time, and during the holiday season, I think it was Thanksgiving, and my 3 grown children had all returned, and we're having a great time. And I've got 3 kids. We love to tease and joke around and laugh and have a good time. And so we're just being kind of silly and laughing with each other. And then all of a sudden, my wife pulls out the food and says, "All right, Richard, would you just ask a blessing? Would you just pray for this food, and then we can eat?" But my problem is, and I'll just be real transparent with you. I was in a very playful, joking, irreverent mood at the time, and we weren't being crass or crude, but we were just being playful and joking around. And then all of a sudden, I'm entering into a conversation with God, and I took my playful, joking kind of spirit into my prayer, and basically supposedly I'm praying, but I'm kind of poking fun at my kids at the same time. And finished praying. I thought we're ready to eat now. And I open my eyes and my wife is just staring at me. And I've been married 40 years now. And that means that my wife doesn't even have to say a word and I know I'm in trouble. and and she kind of pulled me aside and said, what did you just do? I said, well, I prayed. You asked me to say prayer for the food. I did what you told me to. She said, no, you just talked to God like he was some kind of clown. And you did it in front of our 3 kids. And she said, if I were to go back to each of our kids and say, based on the prayer you just heard your father pray, how awesome do you think his God is? She said, you misrepresented God. He's not like that. He's not like us. He's awesome. And you didn't talk to him like he was awesome. And I realized praying for your food is a good thing, right? But you can do it in a way that does not honor God. And, going to a church service is a good thing, but sometimes I've been in services that looked like they reflected American Idol more than they reflected Revelation chapter 4. And we're doing the right thing. And then we wonder why God's not blessed, or we think we're doing the right thing. But then we wonder, well, God, why aren't you blessing what I'm doing? And God might say, because you're doing the right thing the wrong way. And I'll tell you, wouldn't that be awful if you got to the end of your life and your whole life you'd been frustrated trying to do the right thing and God for some reason hadn't chosen to bless you. And then you get to the end of your life and realize, well, because you were doing it the wrong way your whole life. And God was just withholding his hand saying, no, my ways. Your ways are not my ways. Well, one other one maybe is just that God's ways are eternal. And it says in Psalm 90, verse 2, before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. And of course, we all we all will live and exist for an eternity, but only God always been eternity. And that means that means that this earth was even formed, he already knew what you would face. And that means God takes a long view of everything. When he looks at you and how you're conducting yourself at work right now, he doesn't just see today. He sees that how you live today will affect eternity. And with that long view, that of course you're going to live one way. If you're living for eternity, you're going to live a different way. My dad used to always say, and he said in experiencing God didn't make you for time, he made you for eternity. And so whenever God relates to you, he has an eternity spanning behind you. And so he knows how every decision you make will affect eternity. That's why when God tells you to do something, he knows that if you disobey him, if you don't do what he tells you, he knows 1,000 years from now how that's going to affect people and generations to come because you were not obedient. It's kind of like Adam and Eve, when you can imagine Adam saying to Eve, I don't know what the big deal is. We just ate a piece of fruit. And God would say, you have no idea how much evil is going to be unleashed into humanity because of that one act of disobedience. I can't even begin to tell you how many people will be murdered, will be robbed, will be raped, will be assaulted because of that one act of disobedience. Adam and Eve, if I were to show you the consequences for the rest of eternity, there will be people spending an eternity separated from God because of what you did just now. Don't ever treat your disobedience to God lightly, because there are eternal consequences to everything we do. But also there's eternal benefits. When you obey God, far, far more happens than you might imagine. You're working next to a guy at work that's not a Christian. And so you just keep trying to be faithful before him. You keep trying to be a consistent witness before them. You honor God in the way you do business, and you try to offer a witness as you can. And maybe that person never becomes a Christian. Eventually they move on to another job, but but you planted seeds in their heart that that eventually bear fruit, and they always remembered you. I mean, you might be the only Christian that they ever really knew personally, but they really were impressed with your integrity, with your love, your concern. And eventually they have an opportunity to go to a church, and they become a Christian, and they start taking their kids to church. And eventually one of their kids is saved and feels called into ministry, becomes a pastor, and leads a church. Now, you don't know any of that. You lost track of that colleague years ago, but now there's generations after you're dead and gone. That colleague's family now has a whole line of ministers that are seeing many, many people become Christians and enter into eternity. And, I just really believe that one day we're going to all be in heaven, hopefully, and God will lay before us and say, that when you work for those 5 years at that company, and remember that guy that you're always trying to you prayed for and you tried to witness to, and he never did become a Christian while you were there, but you planted seeds. And let me show you what those seeds have done ever since, generation after generation. I think if you begin to recognize the eternal impact of every act of obedience in your life, you'd be scared to death to miss one opportunity. And what might seem like a small thing to you, amortized over eternity, can be a massive thing. And so when you look, and by the way, every person that you work with has an eternal soul. Every customer you do business with, and you're tempted perhaps to lie to or exaggerate the truth, or maybe to manipulate in some way. Every one of them has an eternal soul that hangs in the balance. And when you begin to look at every person, not as a potential customer, but as someone with an eternal soul, it affects the way you treat them. There's a lot at stake that you represent God well. And so I look at that. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was a business person, and he took it very seriously that he was a child of God, that he should do everything above reproach with integrity, that he should represent God well. And unfortunately, he worked for some pretty ungodly supervisors, and he kind of got in sideways with some of them because he would not tell a lie, he would not compromise the truth. And so they thought, how are we going to do business with this guy? He doesn't kind of go along with the way things are done here. And so they couldn't just outright fire him. So what they did is they sort of exiled him. They would transfer him to all the worst postings in their company. And he got exiled to the distant fringes of Western Canada at one point. And my grandfather, though, always told his kids, be a person of integrity. Better to work in the hinterlands of your company than to compromise truth and your witness. And so my dad grew up about 90 miles south of the Alaska border, right on the western coast of Canada. And his dad was managing the outlet there for his company. But my grandfather said, well, instead of being bitter about the fact he got exiled to the farthest extreme of his company, he got there and he realized there wasn't a church there. It was so rough. It was such a pioneer area that they couldn't even find a church to go to. So my grandfather just started one, and he's a manager, but he's a business person. But he starts a church, and all there is his wife and his 3 sons. But they have church, and eventually people start getting saved there. They start growing in attendance, and ultimately they called the pastor to take over. And that was probably in the 1930s. And to this day, that it's the biggest evangelical church in that entire area. Years later, I was speaking in Qatar in the Middle East, and my oldest son, Mike, with me. He was 18 at the time. And we go all the way, we're in Qatar and as soon as I speak the first service, this couple comes rushing up to us. They introduced themselves to us, and then they said, we both got saved in the church your grandfather started. back in Canada in Prince Rupert. Well, this was like 65 years after he started that church. It was about 7,500 miles away from where he started that church. And I thought to myself, my grandfather's long since been in the grave, but he would never have dreamed that when he was choosing to have a good attitude, when he was choosing to honor God, even when he's being mistreated at work, that when he just said, "I will not compromise the truth and my integrity," he would have had no idea that 65 years later, his oldest grandson and his oldest great grandson would be running into people in the Middle East saying, "If it hadn't been for your grandfather, we would not be Christians today." And interestingly, that grandfather was mistreated in some ways for sure at work, and yet he was the greatest man of God that my father knew. And my grandfather never knew that his middle son would ultimately become a very popular Christian author whose writings and ministry would bless churches around the world. And his younger son, his 4 kids would all be ministers as well. My dad had 5 kids. All 5 of them are to this day are in full-time Christian ministry. I've got 3 kids. They're all in full-time Christian ministry. Now I'm working on my grandkids. My grandfather had no idea that when he was having a rough time at work and not being treated right, he had no idea what was at stake down line. We all look to our grandfather and say, because he was such a man of God, almost every one of his descendants, well, all of his descendants are Christians, and most of them are full-time ministers. He wasn't a full-time minister. He was a business person. But and he died in 1961. It's been a long time since he could see what's happening. But I have no doubt that one day in heaven, God's going to say, remember when you could have just become bitter about how you're being treated? You could have gotten ugly. You could have fired off some angry letters. Instead, you tried to do things my way. Let me show you how it's been affecting eternity ever since. You have to just look at your life with an eternity in the backdrop. And maybe the last thing just to say about that is, I had 3 kids, and my biggest concern was as they were growing up that they would not see anything in their father that would turn them away from Jesus. And so I just had to realize sometimes when I was having to deal with some really hard things at work, I had to be very careful to guard my heart because I took my kids to church every Sunday. But if they saw me worried and stressed and bitter all week long because of work and life, it didn't matter how many church services I dragged them to during the weekend. The way I conducted myself all week long would invalidate, would cancel everything they learned in Sunday school. There were 3 eternal souls growing up in my household, and I was a steward of their lives. And so when you look at your kids, not just as a project, sometimes I could be tempted to look at my kids more as a task. I got to get these kids raised. I've got to check the box. Had 3 kids, raised them all to adulthood. Well, no, there's a whole lot more than that. These are 3 kids with eternal souls, and I want them all to spend an eternity with Jesus. And so how I live my life, how I raise them, how I relate to them, how I control my temper around them, all of that, how I control my mouth and what I say or don't say, is going to affect their eternity. And so there's just too much at stake to be careless, to say, well, I was having a bad day today. It was a rough day at work, so I'm going to come home and vent at home with my kids. No, these are eternal souls I'm dealing with. And I've got to treat them that way and value them that way. And by the way, even that person at work that frustrates the dickens out of you, that person has an eternal soul too. And yeah, they may frustrate you, but God sees them as someone with an eternal destiny, and he's put them right next to you, a Christian. And so he's looking for you to relate to them with their eternity in mind. So God's got many different ways. His ways are powerful. There's lots of different ways we could have gotten into, but I just want you just to take maybe some time, if you have a moment this week, just to ask. And so God, when I start to think about the way I do business, the way I conduct myself, God, the way I'm relating to my kids or grandkids, the way I do business, the way I treat my spouse. God, are those your ways, or are those just the way I've always done things? Just because it's how you've always done things, or that's how your dad did it, your mom did it, that doesn't mean that's how you should do it. And so I'm always praying and saying, God, this is how I'm doing things right now, but would you take any of the ways I'm behaving and just upgrade them so I'm doing them your way instead? And God, I know there's always room for improvement. And so I'm grateful that God is gracious. He doesn't just condemn you and point out all your shortcomings. God invites you to say, why don't you let me raise the way you're doing things from the way you're doing them now to the way I do them? And then you're going to start getting God's results as a consequence. Well, let me just stop there. In case there might be a question. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but be glad to answer a question if there is one.
Yeah, if you've got any questions for Dr. Blackaby, and this is golly, this is so challenging. If you've got any questions, you can put them in the chat. And I know you don't have time to go through this way of God completely, but as you were talking, I was thinking about this. In New York, we live in probably the cultural center of the United States, if not the world. And it can be really hard to live counterculturally. And one of
Yeah.
your last ways of God um, is that God's ways are countercultural. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you would just, I know we've only got like 2 or 3 minutes, that's not fair, but if you would say a word about God being countercultural.
Yeah, of course, that's ultimately why they killed Jesus, because everything he said went against what society, what his culture was promoting, and so you can become a target, and a lot of times you can be pressured into where people will say, well, Christians, you're just a bunch of troublemakers, you just disagree with what everyone else, or you're judging people, you're because you disagree with how people are living their life or whatever, and we can be bullied into just sort of compromising and just doing things the world's way, and that's why, by the way, I think it's great to be in a group like this where you kind of need to support each other. Like I said, these CEOs I work with, these are high-powered people, but they realize they need a band of brothers or sisters or people that are also committed to doing the same things, because God's ways, and just some basic ones, like God says, if you seek to always be first, that's not the way the kingdom works. The last will be first. Or if you want everybody to serve you, that's not the way my kingdom works, that you're the chief servant. And Jesus just kept saying, now this is how you've been taught, but let me tell you how I do things. And you realize Jesus was a revolutionary. I mean, he walked right in and he said, I mean, everything he did just about seemed to contradict the way that everybody else was doing it at the time. And I'll tell you what, that's really a hard, lonely journey to do by yourself. And that's why you need a church family, why you need other business people that are committing themselves, that even if they stand out. And by the way, just one of the ways of God is that he's always loving. There's nothing God ever does that's not loving. He can be completely countercultural and still the most loving person you'll ever encounter at the same time. So don't ever think that because you kind of don't go along with the crowd that it's an unloving thing. It's actually the most loving thing. Someone's got to point out to everybody else that the way they're going is not God's way. It's not going to get God's blessing. And have the courage to say, I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm trying to tell you there's a better way, and then live that way out in front of them so that they see. I mean, and I've had people say to me, Richard, I don't agree with a lot of your theology. I don't believe the Bible the way you do, but I got to hand it to you. All three of your kids are awesome young adults. They're great parents, and they all they love you. And I wish I had a family as close as you do. And all I can say is, listen, that it's not because I'm just some wonderful person. I just, best of my ability, I tried to do things God's way, and God's blessed. And so just live out, just show people the difference when you do things God's way. And it becomes obvious to people watching that you have joy, that you don't live in fear. When when COVID came, not every Christian did this, but Christians sure had the opportunity to demonstrate the difference that Christ makes in your life when you face a pandemic, when you face a crisis. God's ways bring peace. God's ways bring joy. And so in this crazy, crazy world that's so confusing today, we have an opportunity as Christians to demonstrate the difference God makes when you do things his way.
Thank you, Dr. Blackaby. That's incredible. In a moment, I'm going to ask you how we can be praying for you, and I'm going to close this in prayer, and we're gonna pray for you. Thank you for blessing us today. And I can't imagine how busy you are every day, and it means a lot that you would invest in the leaders in our church in this way. So, in a moment, we're going to pray for you. So be thinking about how we can pray for you. So right now, I'm going to ask Dominic if Dominic, you will share in the chat the winners of the copies of the Ways of God. So we're going to give these away. If you filled out your registration card, you can still do it. The links are in the chat. You can go to journeynyc.com/breakfast or bocajourney.com/breakfast, and you can take some of those next steps. Let us know that you were here. Or Dominic, maybe it's better if you can unmute yourself and share who the winners are, and then we will mail the book to you. So everybody, welcome Dominic. Dominic, I think
Hello.
we got a few winners. Who wins the copies? They've been saying in the chat, everybody's saying they want a copy of the book now. So
All right, so our first winner is Vince Los Cal.
obedience or disobedience that you do today will impact down the line. I'll never forget the way that landed hard. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me ask you, how can we be praying for you? I want to close this in prayer. I want to pray for everyone on the call, but we'd love to lift you up in prayer in your ministry.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know, maybe it's just from my travel, sitting on millions of miles on airplanes, but I've had some real back issues, just almost debilitating here of late, where it's hard to get out of a chair sometimes, and I'm going to be a specialist next week, but just a lot of I've been pretty healthy most of my life, but just lately this back issue has been just really putting a lot of pain that I've had to deal with. So appreciate pray that we just find some relief and answers. And then just one other thing, my aunt, my dad's younger brother, his wife is having a major tumor removed this morning. She's about 80 years old, a sweet lady. My uncle died about 2 years ago, and she's facing this alone. She was married for 60 some years and never faced surgery like that. They'll find out how malignant it is when they take the tumor out today. So it's a large tumor, and they'll find out if how serious it is when they pull it out today. It's about a 3-hour surgery. So her name's Margaret Blackaby, and I just really have her on my heart today.
Well, let's go together, all of us together in prayer. I want to pray for you, but let's together pray for Dr. Blackaby and for Margaret right now. Father, I just thank you that we had this opportunity today, and thank you that in the midst of all the things of this world that distract us from what's most important, we can pause and be reminded that we were created for and we live every day for something bigger than we can see, for eternity. May we not forget that. And I pray that everyone on this call that we will be impacted, and that we will see the people we work with, see the decisions we make in light of eternity. And we always, God, want to honor your holiness and live like you and be holy. I lift up to you right now, Dr. Blackaby. I just pray for his health. I pray for healing of his back. God, you heal in many ways. I pray that you would just heal him supernaturally, that the pain would go away, and that he would be renewed. If you choose to heal through the doctors, I pray that you will give them wisdom. But God, I just pray that nothing pain-wise would keep him from doing what you have for him to do, and sharing the gospel and strengthening believers. And I want to pray also for his Aunt Margaret, who's going through surgery today. God, I pray first of all that she will feel your peace, your presence, and your power, that she won't feel alone, but she'll feel loved by her family and her friends. I pray for healing in her body. I pray that the tumor is healed, and I pray that you give the doctors wisdom for how to respond. And I just pray that in the midst of all of this, whatever your will is, God, that their family will feel peace and be just reminded of your presence in their life. I thank you for Dr. Blackaby's ministry. I just pray that you continue to bless it and those who are touched by it. Give us strength to live for you today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.